The way life kind of shakes out is sometimes you'll have folks that don't get the number of chances that they deserve. And other times, you'll get folks that get way more opportunities and chances than they merit or deserve. And I think when you look at the Detroit Lions in 2020, Bob Quinn, Matt Patricia are an example of the latter. They got more chances and opportunity than they freaking deserved. Like, I can't imagine sitting there and having the balls to say that Jim Caldwell taking you to the playoffs a couple of times and the 9-7's not good enough, and then looking at what disaster Matt Patricia was those first 2 seasons and say, yeah, inject that straight into my veins. I want a third one. And you'll wonder how that's going to turn out. Like when you got players just openly venting about how much Matt Patricia sucked and how much they hated him and how much he pissed him off and how much he didn't treat him like basic human beings. It's a perfect example of the dangers of hiring a coach from the Belichick coaching tree. Sure, you have those guys that appear to be hits, you know, guys like the Brian Flores of the world, but you get far too many of the Eric Manginis of the world. You get far too many of the Bobs of the world. You get far too many of the Matt Patricias of the world and the Josh McDaniels of the world. These guys that walk around with a pompousness and attitude and arrogance coming from a place that they haven't earned or they haven't deserved. They're trying to play the Belichick game and they have none of the skills or aptitude of Belichick. And they think this my way or the highway shit works when they haven't established anything. Like Belichick can do it his way because he has pedigree and a track record of success of coaching in the league as a coordinator with the Giants in the 80s. And, you know, obviously with his time in New England. So imagine being a player and going to Bill Belichick and saying, I know better than you. That's not going to happen. And if it does, that player's gone. And if you found out about it publicly, everybody would unanimously mock him. It's just the way it is. But they got another chance to prove that they could do something good. And surprise, surprise, they didn't do anything good. And just as bad as they had been the entire time, they proved just how much they didn't deserve that third chance. They found creative ways to choke games. Matt Patricia is supposed to be this defensive mastermind. His defense absolutely sucked. Like, it was bad. And then we watched the Thanksgiving game against the Texans. At least the Ford family came to their senses and said, we don't need to see anymore. We don't need to allow this to finish out through the end of the season. They embarrassed us on national television. Everybody watching on Thanksgiving, they got to go. It's a shame that it takes something like that to come to that realization and come to your senses like that. But at least you could say they finally acted. And they let Darrell Bevell run them into oblivion the last few games of the year. But yeah, this team sucked. There's no other way to put it. They were 30th in the league in rushing yards per game on offense, 20th in total yards per game. You know, it doesn't help when your number one weapon in the passing game, Kenny Golladay, only plays 5 games. That doesn't help. But even if he was there, how much of a difference is he really going to make? I mean, really? And defensively, you know, when you spend a number 3 overall pick on a kid like Jeff Okudah from Ohio State, you're hoping, A, that it'll actually be good, and that was questionable this year, and you're going to hope that you get more than 9 games out of him. And this defense was dead last in the league in total yards allowed per game. Like, how do you make your chops in the NFL as a coach on the defensive side of the ball and then get your own team, and your defense is the one that not only sucks high tit, but is literally the anchor that brings this entire team down? You had 12 games allowing 3/4 of your games, you allowed 27 or more points. I don't care what Stat Patford and the offense did. It wasn't going to be enough. Like, at your very best, your very, very, very best, if the offense killed it every week, you're winning maybe 7 or 8 games. But they weren't at their best, and the defense was god-awful, so that's why they got to a spot where they're now going to be picking 6 overall in the draft. Unbelievable. Like, what a mess. What a mess Detroit is. When you look at this offseason, what do you got to do? Well, obviously, number one, you got to hire the right general manager. I know they brought Chris Spielman into the fold to be part of that decision-making process, and we'll see what he does. But you got to get the right GM, or if Spielman's going to be the GM, I don't even know what the hell they're doing at this point, but got to have the right football decision-maker there who's going to bring in the right head coach. I'm assuming right now, and it's only January 7th, the date that I'm recording this, I'm assuming that Robert Saleh, The defensive coordinator from the 49ers is probably the leading contender here. And they're probably looking at trying to have a guy that can create a culture, create a winning culture that actually knows what the hell he's doing on the defensive side. A guy that the players can respect, and I think Saleh certainly does that. So if that is who they go with, you never know with these coaching hires, admittedly. You never know. Although 90% of the time, if it's from the Belichick coaching tree, it's going to be a bad decision. The Detroit Lions couldn't help but pluck the fruit there with Matty McGrabberass. But they got to get this decision right. And then they got to make a decision about Matthew Stafford. Here's a guy now in his early 30s. This 12th season with the team, going into his 13th. Had a pretty big cap number attached to him the next couple of years. What do? Do you reload and retool around Matthew Stafford? A guy who, has been the franchise quarterback for you for over a decade. That is true. But you haven't won that much with. And that's not to blame him. That's not saying it's his fault. So calm down, Lions fans. What that is saying, though, is you get to a point in time, you went down this path and went down this formula, do you really want to invest that much in him? Is it really worth it? Does that loyalty pay off? And I don't know that it does or does not in this particular case. And part of the problem here, too, is that they've only got, I think, about $10 to $15 million in cap space. For a roster this bad, you would hope to God that you have way more cap space than you actually do. Because you'd want to plug some of those holes in free agency, and it'll be questionable to see how much they can actually do that without reworking some contracts and releasing some players and so forth. And then you got to think about some of your own free agents, Marvin Jones, Everson Griffin, Okwara, Jared Davis, Deron Harmon. Those are several guys from the defense that was already not good, but you look at Okwara, who was their best pass rusher last year, Jared Davis, former first-round pick, their inside linebacker, Deron Harmon. Are these guys that you're going to retain? And if so, can you do anything else at all in terms of your roster, in terms of adding pieces? Because you need help, God knows, on both sides of the ball. So what do? I think when it comes to the draft, I think the focus should be in the trenches again. I think focusing on the interior of that offensive line makes a lot of sense and might be something that they focus on, whether it be the first round or the second round. I think they definitely need to do that. I think the defensive line, both inside and on the edge, is something that they need to invest multiple picks on. Because, again, this defense was just really, really bad. Because Matt Patricia didn't know what the hell he was doing. Bob Quinn didn't know what the hell he was doing. Just that simple. These guys did not know what the hell they were doing, and the results bore that out. So you've got to build up the trenches. And especially if you're trying to build this team around Matthew Stafford, that's where the emphasis, the focus, and the priority is going to be. I think quarterback is a need, but it depends on what your philosophy and approach is going to be as to whether or not it becomes need number one. Let's say if you move on from Matthew Stafford, you trade a Matthew Stafford, or is it a secondary day 3 type of scenario where you want to take a young quarterback to learn under Matthew Stafford to potentially position yourself well for the future? But it's certainly going to be done. I think wide receivers a need too, especially if you don't bring back Marvin Jones in free agency. Quintez Cephas, I think, had a nice rookie season. Hopefully you'll get back Kenny Golladay to play more than 5 games in 2021. But you probably need a third weapon there. You want to continue to help out whoever your quarterback's going to be, and especially assuming it's Matthew Stafford. But I think this is a draft that they have to focus on physicality on both their offensive and defensive line, and they got to get better in those areas. Because that will help better protect the quarterback. That will help open up holes in the running game on a more consistent basis. And defensively, that will allow them to maybe get after the quarterback a little bit better and be a little bit more effective against the run, especially up the gut. What else? Yeah, if you're a Lions fan, I could talk about my Bears and how they're in a bad place, because they are. But the Lions are in a really, really bad place. The Lions are a perfect example of, similar to what I talked about with the Houston Texans, they got a young franchise quarterback and they're wasting him. The Detroit Lions for over a decade got a young franchise quarterback and completely, totally wasted him. That's a crime against Matthew Stafford. That's a crime against the quarterback position. That is a crime against the National Football League. And most importantly of all, the Detroit Lions organization and their damn fans. You've had Stafford for 12 years, and even for the folks, even me, sometimes I like to poke fun and call him Stat Padford. Because sometimes he is in a spot where he pads his stats late in games because his defense has gotten shredded so goddamn much he doesn't have a choice but to throw every down. Like, it's criminal what they've done to Matthew Stafford in Detroit. And for those that sit there and say, well, during his career, he's always struggled to beat good teams. A lot of quarterbacks do. It's hard to beat good teams in the league. But you never really built a team around him truly, sincerely, that you could really point to and say, that's truly a contending team. And then if they're not a contending team, you could actually point to Matthew Stafford and say, you know what? He's just not that good. He's not that level of dude. You're just in a position where you've never been able to even test that. That's the worst thing of all. It's not that you can sit there and say that Matthew Stafford isn't that level of dude. It's you've never gotten in a spot to actually truly know whether or not he is. Leave it to Detroit. After an 0-16 season to get a kid like Matthew Stafford, and in 12 years later, still trying to figure out who the hell he truly is. What a waste.